All right, well, Monday it was Iran, and Wednesday it was Irene, and that's an improvement. Anyway. All right, so state of the network state. Gonna blast through a bunch of stuff here, a lot of new content. So first, let me give an intro to what is the network state. The concept is, we've started new currencies. Can we start new countries? And talk is in three parts. First, starting new countries if possible. Second, but why now? And third, what next, right? So let's do the first part. Starting new countries is possible. More specifically, it's something I've talked about in this book at thenetworkstate.com. I think it's not just possible, but preferable and profitable. Let's start with that first part, possible. Basically, we've started new companies like Google. We've started new communities like Facebook. We've started new currencies like Bitcoin from a white paper. Can we start new countries? And that's the concept of the network state. Here's what a network state actually looks like. It is just like Bitcoin's a decentralized currency, a network state's a decentralized country. It has nodes around the world, but the hearts of the people are all in one place. This is an example of a network state with 1,729,314 people that has population and income and real estate footprint comparable to that of a legacy nation state like Estonia, except all around the world rather than in one place. That 1 million is kind of a magic number. How would we actually get to something that big? Well, you can actually do it just like a normal startup. Here's just like Zuck starts out of a dorm room. You have somebody starting in Japan with one person. They get 17 people to co-live around the world, and then 172, 1,729. They start getting buildings and communities together. They've got 17,000, 170,000, and then eventually 1.7 million. And that's how you can actually build a decentralized country. Now, that 1 million actually puts us within country range because most countries are small countries. The majority of UN countries have less than 10 million people. Only a few countries are like the big countries like the US and Russia and China. And not only are most countries small countries, UN membership has actually grown over time. Since 1945 to the present day, the number of new countries in the sense of UN members has increased 4x. That's more than we usually think. It's been static for a long time. Moreover, we already know that cryptocurrencies rank with fiat currencies. This is a fun website called fiatmarketcap.com. And if you go there, at the time I went there, Bitcoin was somewhere in between the Turkish lira and the Chilean peso. This was a few years ago. It's higher now, okay? So if cryptocurrencies can rank with fiat currencies, could crypto countries rank with fiat countries? If you take the Wikipedia table of nations and the real estate and population and so on, a crypto country with 1,729,314 people, a network state, would be somewhere between Latvia and Bahrain. It would just be global and decentralized, just like a Bitcoin, a cryptocurrency is global and decentralized. Very analogously, we know we've been able to rank on that previous leaderboard. Maybe we can rank on this new one. Now, this is how that dashboard earlier maps to that population. Now, one thing people might say is, well, you might get big, but would you actually get diplomatically recognized? And the thing is that the cloud is already doing deals with the land. So, for example, GoDaddy is doing deals with Tuvalu for the .tv domain. Tesla is doing deals with Nevada for the Gigafactory. El Salvador is adopting Bitcoin as its national currency. And in general, I can give many examples of this. The land is already open for business and doing deals with the cloud, so a crypto community could probably get at least a special economic zone or something like that from a traditional country, especially if you've got capital and you've got talent. So that's why I think it's possible. Why is it preferable? Well, basically, there's really two groups of people. It's the same groups of people that are into crypto. It's the powerless and the power users. Okay? It's those folks who are trying to hang on to a bank account or a country, and those are pushing the limits of what a bank account or a country even are. And for all these people who are living in failed states or failing states, Sri Lanka and Venezuela and Panama, all these riots, all the inflation that's being exported around the world, if people in rich countries are having a tough time, if people in poor countries are having even a tougher time, they need new states. And then, of course, there's also the pioneer mindset that led us to, as humans, leave Africa, go to the US, land on the moon. That pioneer mindset lets us to push the limits of what countries even are. So that's why they're preferable. And why are they profitable? This is last but not least, financially feasible is a form of feasibility. This is a great table that shows the annual revenue per user of nation states, social networks, and network states. And so the x-axis there is the number of people in millions, and the y-axis is annual revenue per user per capita. And so over here, for example, are the social networks. And so that's like, Facebook or Meta and WeChat and LinkedIn and so on and so forth, and those have got billions of users. But if you look at the y-axis, they've got only on the order of tens of dollars per person per year. So $10 times 3 billion users is 30 billion per year. Pretty good business if you can get it. Over here are the small countries. They only have a few million users, like Estonia or Singapore or what have you, but their monetization per person is like tens of thousands of dollars per person per year, okay? Here are the big two countries, the US and China, which have a lot of scale, very large populations on the x-axis, and high monetization per user in terms of tax revenue per year on the y-axis. And I think network states would land around here, where they're between 1 to 10 million-ish people, and the monetization per person per year is in the hundreds of dollars, perhaps for a DAO membership, and eventually in the thousands of dollars per person per year for rent or community membership or something along those lines. And so, but these can grow and these can become big, but this is why these could be financially feasible and potentially venture backable. Okay, so that's why I think starting new countries is possible, but why now? What is the moment that's happening now? So the reason I think this is going to be happening now is I have a concept which I call history is running in reverse, okay? And what do I mean by that? So let me just show you some examples. So if you go backwards in time, you see certain events that are happening today, but with the opposite sign, the opposite direction. For example, you go back to 1890, the Western frontier closed. Forward to 1991, the internet frontier opens. You go backwards in time, you have the Spanish flu. Forwards in time, COVID-19. Backwards in time, you have the captains of industry, the robber barons. Today, we have the tech billionaires. Backwards in time, the journalists actually beat the founders. Ida Tarbell, Investigator Rockefeller, they busted the trust, all the great fortunes were pushed into foundations, there was communism, all the seizure of the great fortunes. Today, the founders are beating the journalists. Haha, okay. Back then, the New York Times was on the side of Stalinist Russia to choke out Ukraine. Today, the New York Times is on the side of Ukraine versus Russia. Back then, America actually shipped goods to China. This is an amazing cartoon. Forgive the stereotype in it, but basically it's showing Uncle Sam taking all these goods to China, which is just a market, okay? Now today, it's completely the opposite, where it's China that is shipping all these goods to America. I mean, the reversals are amazing. I'll show you a few more. Back then, Russia was the senior partner in the Sino-Soviet relation, right? Stalin was senior, Mao was junior. Today, it's reverse, where China is a senior partner in the China-Russia relationship. And back then, there was a British guy who ran India. Today, there's an Indian guy who runs Britain. Okay, it's kind of fun, all right? So we can see history running reverse quantitatively as well. This is a very important graph which shows the geocenter of the global economy. For thousands of years, it was in Asia, or Eurasia, let's say. And then with the Industrial Revolution, over the course of hundreds of years, it rocketed out to the West. And 1950 was peak Westernization. That's when the center of the world economy was positioned between the USA and Western Europe. And people think that's the natural state of the world because it's the beginning of the post-war order, but it's actually one of the most atypical times in human history. It's like balancing something on its head. It's when the West was very, very powerful and the rest of the world wasn't. And so what's happened since then is that the world economy, the center of it, has rocketed back east. And it's happening now in tens of years. So it's in the east for thousands of years. It went west over hundreds of years, and it's coming back east over tens of years. And these kind of U-curves you see in many different places. Another of them is on tax rates. So now there's exceptions to this, and you can point to Canada's recent boost. But in general, mid-century was a time of communism in the east and 90% marginal tax rates in the west. And those have broadly come down. And in the same way, fortunes, the great fortunes were seized, and then they were released. And this is always talked about in terms of inequality, but actually in some ways, power inequality is decreased because if you were an entrepreneur, you were just confiscated in the Soviet Union or China, or actually to some extent even America, gold was seized. And mid-century is very hard to start a business, and now you can actually do that. Other things that have run in reverse. Back then, the US was 10x Chinese steel production. Today, China's 10x American steel production. Back then, America was ideologically unified. It was like a single uniparty where all the people, these are congressmen, whether Democrat or Republican, they voted basically the same way. By 2011, that was completely split apart. It's like mitosis of a cell. And in fact, I'm saying America is ideologically disintegrating, but if you look at social networks, it's not just ideologically disintegrating, it's ideologically ideologically disintegrated, because on the left you have Mastodon and Blue Sky and Threads, and on the right you have Gab and Parler and Truth Social. These networks have millions of people, and if you go there, they're both speaking English, but they have completely different worldviews and values. It's like people speaking Korean, these are in North Korea and these are in South Korea. They've already ideologically, digitally seceded from each other. And that remains to be printed out in the physical world. So that means we're going to see new countries, because that's happening all around the world. All kinds of places are getting split ideologically, and it just hasn't been printed out yet. Now, remember this graph, the graph of all the new countries rising from 45 in 1945 all the way up to about 4x that number, 196 or so today. An interesting thing, what led to this? Well, as the British Empire broke down, as the French Empire broke down, the blue countries there are like basically the countries that gained independence from France. And then a little bit later in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, as the Soviet Empire broke down in 1991, all these new countries, there's a sudden burst of new countries that got formed. An interesting question is, what does this curve look like if we go forward, backward and forward in time? If we go backward in time and we ask what happened with this curve before 1945, well, something really interesting happens. Most people don't have a good mental model of what the world was like before then. But if you go a little bit further back in time, and you actually get lots and lots of independent states. For example, this is what is today Germany looked like before Bismarck. This is what India looked like, the princely states, if you go backwards in time. And if you zoom in to even one section of India, it looked completely fractal in the physical world, because in a sense it was unified at the community level, at the cloud level, but not at the land level, okay? If you printed out a social network, it would look like this, okay? And that's kind of what's happening. So you go backwards in time, you have this enormous rise in independent states, okay? And why did that actually happen? That's really surprising. If you get more independent states as you go backwards in time, 1950 was actually peak centralization. That was, in a sense, like the minimum number of independent states. And why did that actually happen? Well, my answer for it is, in the past, the world was decentralized. There wasn't a lot of centralized power, so it's like the loosening of a fist. By 1950, due to communism and the rise of these giant centralized states, the world got clutched into these giga states. Huge unions were formed. And now we're getting re-decentralization. Those centralized states are losing power, and that fist is ungrasping. And you're seeing that, for example, with technology. In mid-century, there was the centralization of mass production and mass media, and everybody was churned together at a factory. And today, you have a Swiss bank account in your pocket. Everybody here does. You can hold arbitrary amounts of money on a phone, okay? So that is the difference between everybody clumped together, at an assembly line and the sovereign individual, right? So that's the technological aspect of centralization and re-decentralization. The political aspect looks like this, where all of the people are, voting together, and now they're all coming apart. So that's why history is running in reverse. And the thing is, though, we aren't done re-decentralizing. We went backwards in time. What if we go forwards in time? So I believe that we're just at the beginning of an explosion of new countries, just as we are in the middle of an explosion of new currencies. And you probably heard this term, the multipolar world. If you're here in a crypto conference in Dubai, you might be familiar with that. And even foreign affairs is starting to admit the world is multipolar. All these people are tugging on it in different directions. And Sunday Telegraph wrote this article, is the increasing multipolarity dragging the world into chaos? Now, there's an interesting quote from a guy who's actually the president of Kazakhstan. And he says, if the right of nations to self-determination was realized in reality over the whole globe, over 600 states would emerge on Earth instead of 193. Of course, that would be chaos. Now, why does this guy say that? Well, he actually lived through the collapse of the Soviet Union, but all these states emerged. And if you go to Wikipedia, you look at the post-Soviet conflicts, there was a lot of conflict. There was a lot of chaos. And that actually may be a preview of what is to come if we extrapolate everything out, because there's more, centrifugal, in the sense of center-fleeing forces around the world, more decentralizing forces than even there were in 1991. So rather, however, than just accept that there's going to be chaos, maybe he's right, but maybe we can forge a new order out of that chaos. Maybe we can ride the tiger. Maybe we go from slinging around coins and tokens, which is fine, to actually building new cities and new countries, and maybe that's what's next. So that's part 3. This is why I wrote the Network State book. And that's why we've started to hold these gatherings. So Vitalik held Zuzulu last year. Some of you may have attended that in Switzerland. Vitalia, which was in Honduras. This was a gathering of people from the cloud who all believed in life extension, longevity. We had the Network State Conference last year. We're going to have another one this year. I'll announce it. And we're going from gatherings to building a movement. So there's now dozens of network state related startup society projects on Gitcoin. We've got a dashboard of this at thenetworkstate.com. They just launched TNS Camp, a network state camp in Austin. So all of these movement leaders, community builders, going from becoming CEO of a company to president of a community or president of a country, I think that's what's next. And it's still early, of course. I would call it pre-2013 crypto. We have yet to see the first startup society unicorns or what have you. But this space is bubbling and things are happening. And we've started new companies, we've started new communities, we've started new currencies. Can we start new countries? I think we can. So thank you very much.